welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today we're tackling something I think we can all relate to, fear.
You know it.
Yep, even us podcast hosts get those butterflies sometimes. But what if I told you that understanding your fear could actually help you achieve your goals?
It's a fascinating concept, right? And you know, what's really interesting about today's deep dive is the source material we have. It's actually a podcast script about personal growth.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we're getting like a behind-the-scenes look at how they frame these ideas of fear and risk. How do they try to motivate their listeners?
Talk about meta.
Right.
It's like podcast inception. All right, so let's jump into this script. One of the things that stood out to me right away was this idea that fear is like this primal biological instinct. Like, you know, it's fight or flight. It's something that our ancestors developed to avoid, being attacked by a saber-toothed tiger or something.
Exactly. Run away.
Right.
But here's the thing. While that instinct was obviously really useful way back when, today most of the things we fear, they're not actual physical threats, are they? No.
It's not like we're running from a tiger. I mean, you think about the things we actually get afraid of. It's more about threats to our ego or our comfort zones or, our carefully crafted plan.
Right, you're not actually afraid of giving that presentation at work.
Right.
You're afraid of being judged or making a mistake or looking foolish.
Totally. You're afraid of what people are going to think.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because so much of our fear today, it's all about like the stories we tell ourselves in our heads.
Yeah.
Right? And the script really emphasizes that it's so important for us to recognize that fear is a feeling, not necessarily a fact.
Okay, so we've established that fear. It's like deeply rooted in us. But how do we actually deal with this primal instinct in our everyday lives? I mean, we can't just run away from every presentation or every challenging situation, can we?
You'd be running all the time.
Right.
And that's where I think this idea of risk-taking comes in. The script connects risk and success. It's like you can't have one without the other. They're two sides of the same coin. And they have some pretty amazing examples in here, too. Like J.K. Rowling facing all those rejections before Harry Potter became a global phenomenon.
Oh, yeah.
Or Steve Jobs taking a leap of faith to create, this revolutionary computer company. Like, these are pretty inspiring stories, I think.
I think so, too. I mean, they both demonstrate, even after facing, tons of setbacks, persistence, right? And a belief in your vision can ultimately lead to success.
Yeah, but let's be real for a second. Those examples, while inspiring, they can also feel, a little out of reach for us normal people. Like, yeah, good for J.K. Rowling, but I'm just trying to get through this week.
That's a really good point. It can be easy to think oh, well, that's them, but that's not me,
Right.
I think what's important to remember is that risk doesn't have to involve launching some huge global brand or writing a bestseller. It can be much smaller. It can be something really personal to you,
Yeah, like signing up for that pottery class you've always wanted to take.
Exactly.
Or speaking up in that meeting, even though you're really nervous to.
Yeah. And this might seem like small steps, but they're still acts of courage.
Totally.
I really like how the script encourages listeners to connect with their own experiences with risk-taking. So I want to ask you right now, think back to a time when you took a risk. It doesn't matter how big or small it was.
Yeah.
What was the outcome? What did you learn from that experience?
Let me see. I remember when
I bet it was a real learning experience. And, that brings us to, I think, the heart of this deep dive. How do we actually overcome this fear and take those risks that lead to growth? And the script actually lays out 5 key strategies. It's almost like it gives you like a toolkit, for tackling these fears head on.
I love that. A fear-busting toolkit.
Right.
All right, so what's the first tool we should grab?
Okay, so the first step, and this might sound a little counterintuitive, but it is to acknowledge the fear.
Oh.
Don't try to bury it or pretend it's not there. Name it. So instead of thinking, ugh, I'm so nervous about this presentation, you say, okay, fear of public speaking, I see you.
Got it. So I'm not ignoring it. I'm just...
You're calling it out. You're
addressing it head on.
Exactly. And the script argues that when we do that, when we just acknowledge the fear, when we put it into words, we actually diminish its power over us. It's like, letting the air out of a balloon.
Oh, I like that. Okay, that makes sense. What's the next tool in our toolkit?
Okay, so the second strategy is all about reframing our perspective.
Okay.
So instead of viewing fear as this giant stop sign, we should see it as more of a signpost, something that's pointing us towards potential growth and new opportunities.
So it's not about ignoring the fear, but it's about understanding what it's trying to tell us.
Exactly. And it encourages us to ask ourselves, what is this fear teaching me about my values, about my desires, maybe even about my boundaries? It suggests that fear, when approached thoughtfully, can actually be a really valuable source of information. That's a really cool way to look at it. Fear as like a teacher, not a tormentor.
Right.
Okay, so what's the third strategy?
All right, strategy number 3 is a classic. Start small.
Okay.
If the idea of taking this big, audacious risk just feels totally overwhelming, just begin by taking smaller, more manageable risks.
Yeah.
Baby steps.
So if someone's terrified of public speaking, they shouldn't just volunteer to give the keynote address at a conference.
Probably not a good idea.
They should maybe start by sharing their ideas in a smaller team meeting or something.
Exactly. Or even practicing their presentation with a friend.
Yeah, okay.
Build up to it. It allows us to kind of gradually build our risk tolerance and our confidence. Think of it like, at an amusement park.
Oh, yeah.
You wouldn't just jump on the most intense roller coaster right away, would you?
No, yeah.
You probably want to start with the smaller ones and work your way up.
I love that analogy. It makes it way less intimidating.
Right.
What's next in our toolkit? What's number 4? All right, number 4 is all about the power of visualization.
Oh.
So the script suggests, taking a few minutes each day and just really vividly picturing yourself successfully navigating whatever situation you're afraid of.
So it's not just like positive thinking. It's about creating like a detailed mental movie in your head.
Yeah. And there's actually a ton of research to back up how effective visualization is.
Oh, wow.
Particularly in sports psychology.
Oh, interesting.
When you repeatedly visualize yourself achieving that desired outcome, you're essentially priming your brain for success.
That's so fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay, so last but not least, what is the final strategy for overcoming fear?
The final strategy is to seek support.
Oh, okay.
Share your fears and aspirations with people you trust, your friends, your family, a mentor,
I think we really underestimate how powerful it can be just to talk things out with someone who we trust.
Yeah.
Why do you think having that support system is so crucial, especially when we're pushing ourselves outside of our comfort zones?
Well, because taking risks can be really isolating. You're
Yeah.
kind of stepping outside of the familiar, of the comfortable, and that can feel really lonely. Having a support system reminds us that we're not alone, that there are people who believe in us even when we doubt ourselves.
Right.
And sometimes even just voicing our fears out loud to someone we trust helps us to see them more clearly. It helps us put them into perspective.
It's like having the safety net,
Yeah.
That even if you stumble, there are people there to catch you, to help you get back on track.
Yeah.
It really is. It really makes you realize that, you don't have to go it alone.
Nope.
There's strength in being vulnerable and letting people in. So we've talked about, understanding fear and the power of risk-taking, and we even have these 5 strategies to overcome our fears. What's the script's main takeaway, though? What's the big message they want listeners to walk away with?
I think the key takeaway is that overcoming fear, it's not about, becoming completely fearless. It's more about developing the ability to manage it, to acknowledge it, and then to just take action, in spite of it.
So it's not about being some kind of superhero who's just immune to fear.
Right.
It's about building resilience. It's about being able to say, okay, I'm scared, but I'm doing it anyway.
Exactly. And, that brings us back to you, dear listener.
Yeah.
What does this mean for your approach to the things that you're afraid of? What small risks can you take today, this week, this month, to start building that resilience muscle?
Right. It's all about the baby steps.
Baby step.
One small risk at a time. Before you know it, you've climbed a mountain.
You've climbed a mountain.
And don't forget, you don't have to do it alone. Lean on your support system, visualize that success, and reframe those fears as opportunities for growth.
Yeah, beautifully said. And, I think this deep dive actually raises another interesting question that the script didn't really touch on.
Oh, okay. What's that?
Well, if fear can be a signal, it's something that we shouldn't just ignore. Is there ever a downside to always just pushing through it no matter what? Is there a balance between honoring those fears and, pushing ourselves beyond them?
That's such a good point.
Yeah.
Sometimes fear is telling us to pause,
Yeah.
to reassess a situation, or to really think about whether something actually aligns with our values. It's definitely something to think about. Maybe sometimes listening to our fear and choosing not to take a particular risk that might actually be the wisest decision, the most courageous decision. What do you think?
I I think it's a conversation we should all be having with ourselves and maybe even with our support systems, right? It's about finding that sweet spot between, throwing caution to the wind and just being totally paralyzed by fear.
Well, this has been such an insightful deep dive. Big thanks to our expert for walking us through this really cool script. And for everyone listening out there, we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on this idea of fear as a signal? What small risks are you thinking about taking? Head over to our social media and let us know.
Yeah, learning from each other's experiences is what makes this journey so enriching.
Absolutely. Thanks for diving deep with us today. And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep pushing yourselves to grow.